Indeed, it is hard work if you're trying to make positive things happen in modern day America. Welcome to August 1st edition of Uncle Bobby's Country Corner, where real men don't play. To my immediate left today, I have a return visitor who's going to be a frequent guest in this particular platform going forward. Wayne Fishback. Welcome, Wayne, back to Uncle Bobby's Country Corner.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
Well, Wayne, I want to set the stage for today's show by letting people know Wayne's world is pretty vast. It's also at times convoluted and absolutely cutting edge. And what we want to do is kind of drill down into how you became such a, I guess, polarizing figure when it comes to some people, and for others, a white knight, no pun intended. So what we want to do is start the show off today in terms of giving people a background as to how you have evolved from one of the world's foremost architects to a visionary who has ideas and plans on how to create more productive environments for people to live and work in. And as it pertains to my audience and my center of influence, the reason that you're sitting here today is to discuss what Wayne's world means to the African American community. Can we get into that today?
We sure can.
All right, let's go to work. So if you would, Portis, run that piece from the local CBS affiliate. Okay, as she sets that up, Wayne, what is it about development that excites you?
Well, I think development means building. It means creating things. It means being creative. It means all those
Speak a little closer to the microphone.
Entrepreneurial things that just get my juices flowing. So development is just building things. It's creating things, and so that's just my nature and the nature of most architects, which is my background.
Now, one of the things that you did was donate some land to what is known as the Golden Triangle down in Mississippi. What was the outcome of that, and what motivated you to give over $2 million worth of property to, initially it was Mississippi State University, right?
Yes, Mississippi State University. And I actually, it wasn't a brand new idea of mine. I saw this happen in other arenas. First time I saw it was somebody owned about 100 acres of land, and they donated 100 acres of land for a new hospital. And lo and behold, the farmer that owned about 2,000 acres of land, his land went tenfold once that hospital was built and the clinics were developed. And so it was quite a beneficial thing to both parties. So even though there was a gift and donation, it came back to the farmer that donated that land, and similar things have happened with the property that I had down there in Mississippi. Okay, so now we're going to engage in watching something that you are doing right here in South Los Angeles.
The 2-mile stretch off Vermont Avenue, where statistics show dozens have been killed over the last decade.
CBS 2's Lori Pettis shows us community members are now redesigning part of the area, and they say the future.
Lacey Hicks is an artist, and on this day, you could also say a land developer.
More unity, more green, more buildings.
Alex Alfaro grew up here and wants to stay.
It's changing, it's growing, and I want to be an active participant in the change.
Community members sat down with entrepreneurs and architects Saturday to set this LA neighborhood on a new course.
It's beyond cleaning, it's actually designed as a voice.
For the past year, architecture professor Marcela Oliva and students from Los Angeles Trade Tech College have been cleaning up part of the area's notorious Death Alley off Florence Avenue to spur a reformation. Physically, she says, but more importantly, symbolically. Now that the alley and this nearby lot are open, so are minds to anything and everything locals want here. What's unique about this project is the community decides and the community designs.
They get to actually play with how is it going to look like, and what are the patterns, what are the templates, and then how do you beautify it. And I think when you beautify it, then there's more engagement by the community.
Matthew Manos led the group in a kind of innovation game, every table throwing out different ways the space could be used and then creating prototypes. It's a method he's used in communities around the world.
We sometimes see ideas for community gardens, right? So places where people can come together and cultivate fresh food. We've even seen ideas for completely new schools that are totally unconventional. And then we've had ideas for businesses that exist on Mars.
This lot could see a park or festivals, art exhibits, or pop-up stores with locally made products. In all and any of it, locals say they see the future.
That's the exciting part about it. It gives us the opportunity to be better at what we do.
In South LA, Lori Perez, CBS 2 News.
So the one face that was not shown on that piece from CBS News was yours. Is there any particular reason why you chose to stay out of the frame on that?
That's a loaded question. Yes, I've kept a rather low profile because what we were doing at that site was what I call somewhat of a microcosm of what I've been doing for about the last 17 years at ranch land that I own out in the Chatsworth area. Turns out that this is just a very mini representation of what I've been doing out at my ranch. And there's certain political forces out there that, boy, they are hell-bent on making sure that I don't use my land in any way, shape, or form. And so all the things that we've been doing that are conservation things, water quality, reusing, recycling material, all of these things that I've practiced and actually was a pioneer back in the 70s after the oil embargo, we've been doing those things out there and been getting nothing but obstruction from government. In fact, it's been a little bit worse than obstruction. And so I came about this project through working down at LA Trade Tech, and I taught a summer course down there, helped participated in it. And so I found out about this alley down there, and I thought, you know, this is a very interesting place, and I think it has all of the abilities to be almost the same thing as what I was doing out at the ranch on a very microcosm level, and that's what we did.
Well, what's interesting to me about that, and one of the reasons why I was introduced to you, is to see from a black perspective as well as a human's perspective, what are the best practices? And when you invited me to meet Marcella and some of the other people at 5 Point, and there's a number of people like Daoud Sherrills, who has been involved with you over the last couple of years, and then I introduced you to Jim Brown, and we kind of sit down and discuss some possibilities about all of the component parts of rebuilding a community that has the opportunity to sustain itself. And so one of the things that I'm looking at as it relates to, and we're going to get into a little more detail about your ranch property out in the Chatsworth area momentarily, but the necessity of what you're doing is important to me in the following way. South LA is the hottest part from a real estate buy and sell situation in Southern California. And there's several reasons for it. The rail system that's running right down this corridor where we are on Crenshaw Boulevard in Mars Media Studios is all being impacted all the way to the airport. And everywhere you look, there is some form of development going on. And here you are planting a flag in one of the most depressed parts of South LA, and actually have skin in the game, because you don't own that property, but you have contributed quite a bit of money to that prototype that we saw. So what was your motivation for picking out that particular plot of land, those particular people, to invest some of your own resources into?
Well, it came through this summer course that I taught, and I learned of a gentleman, Andrew Williams, that had his own project that he was working on at LA Trade Tech during that summer course. So I found out about what was called the living alleys. And these alleys are chained up, gated off areas that used to be where they had, I guess, turf wars and gangs hung out and planted their flag in various alleys. And so I really didn't go out and select that site per se. I just found out about it. And I found out that there was a nonprofit there, and so that was very key to the decision to get involved there. It wasn't just a private property owner. and it was connected with LA Trade Tech. So there were a lot of reasons that attracted me in there to that site. But once I got there, I saw that, hey, there's some commonality between this site, the people that are there, and I said, I'm going to test out and see if I'm working in South LA, if I can do the very same things that I was doing out at my ranch, and that might be appreciated down here. Well, it turns out it's appreciated by the politicians, it's appreciated by the code enforcement agencies, it's appreciated by the community, and so it seems to be a great thing. And so the question is, why isn't this being accepted out in the mountains where there's nobody around?
Speaking of which, you have about 500 acres in 2 different parcels, right?
That's correct. I've got one in Ventura County, which is right on the Ventura County, LA border, which is out between Simi Valley and Chatsworth. And then I own another parcel of land, about 350 acres, just north of Chatsworth, which is in LA County.
Well, one of the things that Wayne and I found out we had in common after having met each other was an interest in urban development, because I have a degree in urban planning, and he has been, like I say, a master architect for over 50 years. And so when he started explaining to me some of the difficulties he was running into, I kind of scratched my head, because the urban planning and the architectural relationship with cities is just so integral to the well-being of a city. And a lot of times, whether a city prospers or not is tied to how things are done, how they're designed, and who they potentially attract to an area. So let's kind of walk back to when you first purchased the property and what you envisioned doing with it then, and then let's progress through what you've done to the property and some of the problems that you ran into since you bought the property 17 years ago.
17 years ago, I bought it in 2000, and the first property that I bought was in Ventura County. And I think I'm one of just about the only architect that I know of, actually, that grew up on a farm until I was about 10 years old, that became an architect. I mean, it's just kind of a natural thing. You would tend to grow up in cities that would attract you into architecture. But most of my background until I, through my formative years, was growing up on a farm. And so it was natural for me at some point when my grandkids were kind of getting up to an age and I wanted to have them come out to a property where they could ride horses and see cattle and that sort of thing, was to buy a piece of property that we could do those kind of things on, which took me back to my childhood. So I had all good intentions of thinking that I was going to take myself back to my childhood. And by the way, this is in an area where you have the movie ranches and the scenery and everything is just spectacular. And so it was, and I was back in Illinois when they were making all of these TV shows that I was growing up on that were made right here where this ranch is. So it was very attractive to me to get the land, and of course not being
Picture of the ranch.
When I was not a native of California, to really know that this land is highly coveted by various political figures and that sort of thing. And so I was just, almost any time I was starting to do anything at all on the ranch, this became a controversy about what I was doing. And I needed permits for this, permits for that, and I had to talk to these people and those people. And so it just really has evolved into a very controversial thing. Anything that I want to do with my property seems to be a problem. And so I'm kind of forgetting what the question was, but anyway, that was my plan, was simply to make a beautiful ranch. And so a lot of the things that we were doing were all of the things that I learned and pioneered back in the days when we didn't even know what green building practices were. We were finding out about urban sprawl, that wasn't a very good thing. We started to learn about locally grown foods, which has been a movement over the past 10, 15 years. All of those things, all of those practices, water quality, conservation, preventing erosion, all of those factored in to how I was working on the ranch. But all of this seemed to be twisted somehow and thought of to be just a horrible thing. Anybody that was touching the land, it had to be bad. Well, this is just nonsense.
Well, the first time I went out to your property, I couldn't necessarily see all of the possibilities till we started really surveying and looking around at the different components of it, because you got wildlife out there, and it was kind of funny. You hadn't seen your cows in 4 or 5 years. I said, man, you got to be kidding me, man. But that's how vast the property is. And, You've also had a segment of it that you had begun to develop for commercial purposes that was also ecologically responsible. So if you would, please talk a little bit about your recycling endeavor.
Okay. The recycling primarily that we're doing is taking what are called inert materials. They're concrete, they're asphalt, they're all the materials that actually come out of the ground. And so one of the things that we have done is to do what's been done actually for thousands of years, and that is terracing land. It's terracing land that is highly eroded, and you take this and basically make it into usable land. Now the land that we have, there's actually a relatively small percentage that we would do that terracing on, but it's something that's been done for thousands of years. So there's nothing new here. What is new is taking materials that are currently all being dumped in quarries, even though the codes now require this material to be recycled. So we've got materials that are required to be recycled at a 65% rate, and actually concrete across the country, I've read studies where 90% or better is being recycled, but not in Southern California. Southern California, in a lot of ways, is trying to maintain the status quo of things, even though it runs contrary to all kinds of new laws that are being passed to reduce air pollution. So, for example, my idea of recycling these materials should be what I call project to project. Mm-hmm. So it goes from one project that's trying to get rid of concrete to another project that needs some broken concrete. Instead of what they're doing now in the Los Angeles region is to move to one place, which is called Irwindale, where 90% of this material is dumped over in the quarries. It's been going on for decades, and apparently that's what the government wants to continue to happen. And so if we were to go to project, it would be kind of like scrap metal, where actually you get paid for scrap metal, and because of that demand for those materials, there's scrap metal places spread out all across the county, all across the city, and that sort of thing. And that's what should be done with these recycled materials, is a decentralized system, distributed system, if you will, versus concentrating all of this. And anywhere you are in L.A. County, you got to go all the way over to this one spot to dispose of it.
Now, you have used some of those materials at the 5 Point Youth Foundation in South L.A. on that particular site, right?
Exactly, those materials, and the only difference is that it's just a tiny little project compared to what we're doing out at the ranch. But for example, I talked about terracing, and so at 5 Points Youth, it's at a very mini scale, but we've terraced that lot. It's about a 50 by a 100-foot lot, which previously had covered with asphalt, and it was kind of filthy, and it was sloped out to the street and the gutter system, stormwater system. So all of this dirty material that would accumulate over the year to the rainy season, accumulate there and just wash right off of that asphalt into the storm drains and right out to the Pacific Ocean. Well, we've raised about a foot that site at the street side, and raise that so that the slope is back so that it doesn't run off. And it's pervious material. A lot of it's broken concrete that we've used for paving. So that has open joints, and the stormwater now percolates down, it's cleansed, and it recharges the groundwater, shows you've improved the water quality by preventing it from running off, and it's basically infiltrates into the groundwater, so you're conserving water rather than it just running off. So those are the kind of benefits that you can have by doing these things.
So had the regulatory agencies not interfered with your vision, what would that site look like now had you not ran into some of the complications that you've experienced?
Now, are we talking down...
Your place.
My place. Well, my place would have been finished years ago, first of all, because what I was doing was a finite level of construction, and construction gets completed at some point. Now, you take these quarries where they're dumping these materials. There's some quarries that they're projecting they could dump these at the rates they're currently going at for 400 or 500 years, okay? So these are not construction projects. These are disposal sites. And while at the end of the day, in 400 years, they say, well, these can be usable sites. Well, of course they can. Any landfill, they convert into some kind of usable purpose, whether it's a park or whatever. In fact, in many parts of the country, they're building shopping centers on top of landfills. So they have to be properly prepared and compacted and that sort of thing, and pilings run down through them, those sorts of things. But no, we I lost my train of thought. Bring me back,
okay.
Bobby.
That's what I'm here for. The question was, what would your site look like minus the impediments that you ran into?
The site would be, and I have to say on the Ventura County site, that it was primarily intended, and it's a setting where it's primarily livestock. So it's a cattle operation, it's horse breeding, and that sort of thing. There wasn't intended to be a lot of crops located there because it's almost all bedrock. There's very little soil on it, although we can import soil and create planting areas, but just the general topography is very severe on that site, and so there's very limited terracing that we could do. But it would have these beautiful pastures, and unfortunately I wasn't able to find some of those photographs that you'd asked me to send in here, but they're just even though we were stopped, there's just these beautiful pastures that used to be just very harsh, eroded ravines, and so by filling those ravines, leveling the land in certain areas, but yet saving the rock formations and the geology, it just would be a drop-dead gorgeous site. And so we would have it just beautiful livestock and animals on that ranch. And this only uses maybe 30% of the land. The other 70% is wide open. Then the wildlife, since we have come onto the property and have feed for cattle and livestock and that sort of thing, water is there. We have far more wildlife than we ever did before we occupied the site.
Well, I'm not all that excited about the possibility of mountain lions and bears and whatnot, but, they come with the terrain, so I get that part of it. Now, the other site that you have, what would that have looked like?
That site would have been much more terraced. First of all, it's a much larger property.
That's the 350 acres.
Yeah, 350
okay.
acres. The Ventura property is about 150 acres. The L.A. County is about 350 acres. And so it is a completely different geology. It's mostly uplifted seabed, and it's mostly sand. There's hardly any silts and clays in the soil. It's almost pure sand. In fact, a lot of it was quarried over past years. So just the reclamation of quarried areas is one thing that we are needing to do, and we've done some of that. There were also a lot of mining roads that are not properly built, and so they're highly eroded, and so we're either removing some of those mining roads or we're improving them where they've got proper drainage, you don't have the erosion, and those sort of things. So the idea of the government saying that we've created, and I'll just use the word, claiming that we've created an illegal dump, is just total insanity, You can look at this and you can see just through the photographs or being on the site that everything that we're doing is a constructed element, whether it be retaining walls, whether we're using it for building horse barns, whether we're using it for terracing the land, sediment basins, dams that have to be created. All of these materials are being used specifically for particular construction purposes.
Now, speaking of construction, as you well know, after traveling to Chicago with me on a moment's notice and being a part of putting the imprint of the National Association of Minority Contractors Chicago chapter into motion, and we're going to finalize that project in the next 30 days. And you introduced me to some of your friends and associates while we were there, one of which is probably the preeminent architect in the world, Andrew Smith. And I got a feel for how you have a circle that you still operate in outside of the one that you have immersed yourself in locally here in southern L.A. But at the same time, when you was in Chicago, you went in the hood too. So I'm going to kind of roll back to your motivation and what are some of the things that you see that can be accomplished between South L.A. and the Ventura County line with respect to bringing people closer together through economic development and actually tending to the land and being better stewards of the land?
Well, as I got into the project, and I didn't really think about this when I started doing this, it was mostly to help an inner city area, which I have been, very much involved in for 40 years, not quite the 50 years, but about 40 years ago I started to become very occupied with large campus planning. In fact, I was involved in a whole city in Saudi Arabia back in the 70s, Saudi Arabian National Guard. I forget if they ever gave a name to it, but anyway, it was literally a city for a couple of 100,000 people that we planned for. So I've been very involved in trying to rebuild our inner cities, literally, we refer to them as slums, ghettos, that sort of thing. And so we got a lot of rebuilding to do. So when I started to make the connection between South Central and the people that I was encountering there and the ranch, I started to think about, with the metro and certain things, transportation that we're establishing now, which Los Angeles 10, 15 years ago had none of this, okay, except for a few buses running around. Now we have the metro, and you can literally get from any part of the city, around. And so we're talking about using inner city youth, because a lot of this agricultural activity and trail building that we're talking about is very ideal for young youth to be involved in those. It doesn't take an awful lot of training, and it gets you work experience and that sort of thing. So we're talking about using inner city kids out on the ranch to do a lot of these activities. Well, what really got me fired up was when I saw Jim Brown come down off the elevator in Trump Tower. I think it was back in early December, and President-elect Trump had called him in, and he was so impressed with this American program, and it was to turn people around. And one of the great frustrations as an architect I've had is because just changing the environment is simply not enough. Architects don't have enough knowledge to figure out how they could change an environment. I don't think it works anyway, that the environment is going to change people. And that's really maybe what some architects have thought, that just because I make a beautiful new city, that if people are alcoholics or they're drug abusers or whatever their problems are in life, if they're not turned around, I don't care what you build. This is going to turn into another slum and a ghetto. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what Trump saw in Jim Brown's program was the first step, or maybe not the first step, but basically it has to go in parallel with rebuilding our cities, is that the people have to change, And so rebuilding the cities, changing people's lives, getting jobs, getting people equity in projects, that sort of thing, that's all about what we started to talk about. So it took me a little bit of time to connect up with Jim Brown, but we have. And so we're very interested in trying to see if we can make a proposal to Jim Brown to say, this looks like this could actually be a whole process that goes all the way from turning people's lives around to educating them, jobs being made available because now they have an education for certain types of jobs. And then that next step, which I'm hearing a lot about, is, hey, can we get some equity in these projects? And we're going to do projects. And then the last thing of these 5 things that I've identified is giving back. I mean, when you go through this whole process and you've been given these opportunities to turn your life around, basically get a job, get an equity position, the last step is to give back, as far as I'm concerned.
So one of the things before we take a little short break that I wanted to discuss with you is the moving parts. For example, I introduced you to a developer, general contractor friend of mine, Godwin of Woodsey, who came out to the site the other day. And I understand that you guys surveyed the property and came to some agreement that you would start on a little incremental project and then begin to build capacity. Is that the case?
That's right. He's going to be he's a contractor, and I'm not sure you even knew this when you introduced him to me, but he specifically has the skills and subcontractors that he works with, the equipment and that sort of thing, that's doing exactly the type of work that we need. Mm-hmm. And so he's going to put a couple of people on the job, bring some equipment in, and so we're going to be using him on the project.
So the elephant in the room in America right now, well, at least one of them, we got several of them actually, but it's the race, the racial divide. I just get the feeling that stuff doesn't really cost your mind much, man. I mean, I've been around you a month. It seems like it's been many, many years. And I'm racially conscious. I have to be. I grew up in the South, the de facto South, the de jure South, where you had to be over here and I had to be over here. What has allowed you to just kind of just move all of that mess out of the way and deal with people as human beings?
Well, I guess it goes back quite a while. I've had some interesting interactions with black people over the years. I think Dick Gregory, when I was about 8 years old, I used to sit at his knees and listen to him crack jokes.
Where?
Southern Illinois University, where he went to school, and I was going to university school, they called it, where both my parents were college professors. And we used to kind of go, not to the school restaurant at university school, but we'd cut out and go over to the student union, where Dick Gregory hung out a lot, okay? So it was just an interaction, you know, as a young boy. Blackbeard, really, race just didn't affect me that much. Then my first big job was with a guy by the name of John Matusami, who was a black architect in Chicago, sat on the board of the Art Institute. One of the first jobs that I ever did when I went down to the city to get my first job with John is we did the headquarters for John Johnson, who started Ebony Magazine and Jet Magazine and that sort of thing. And it's just continued over the years. So I've had a lot of interactions, and I just see the talents that are there. And but I have there is one aspect that I've thought about somewhat, because obviously we have race problems, and I've thought about like countries like Japan and China, which I've done work in a lot of these countries that are completely homogeneous. I mean, in China, you don't become a citizen in China if you're not Chinese. The Japanese are the same way. If you're not Japanese, you're not going to become a citizen. So we welcome all of these different people from around the world. Although it's become a little controversial, you know, if you're not getting in here in the right way, but we're considered the melting pot, and we've always thought of that as our strength. And yet today, you know, people can question that. Is that diversity compared to a very homogeneous society? Is that is that better? Which is better? So I love challenges. I love creativity. I love analyzing things, figuring out if things are better. And quite frankly, I'm involved in an experiment right now to see if we can show that diversity is a better way, and it has strengths attached to it. And I really think our diverse team that we've been building up here has some overwhelming benefits to it that, you know, if you want to just only have white people on your team or you only want black people on your team, I think we can beat them.
So what we're going to do, Wayne, is take a short pause, and then we're going to talk about the green component, the real green piece of this thing, okay? We'll be right back. Feet are on the ground, y'all. Y'all know how I feel about Lucky Lou Rawls, you know. I want to be happy and free, living and loving for me like a natural man. Speaking of natural, I introduce you to a gentleman who changed my life in some very important ways. First of all, he introduced me to living food, because growing up in the South, we fried everything from the rooter to the tutor, okay? And it subjected us to a number of health issues that over time, and it's not just the food, it was the lack of activity, because now you got a generation of young people that can't run from here to the corner, and they have no physical nature, because we had to make our own fires, and everything was manual and physical. And then on top of that, we played sports. So staying fit was a necessity because of the work that had to be done just to sustain life. And here we are in 2017, we battling all kinds of medical issues as well as cognitive issues, because kids are being fed food that does anything but enliven the body. And I introduced you to a gentleman by the name of Adonijah, also known as John Harrison, a few days ago, and you guys just immediately, you know, found common ground. So if you would kind of just walk us through what it means to you to have somebody at your disposal that understands the land the way that he does.
Well, it's just amazing. I wasn't able to see the finished product that he had at Crenshaw High School, but you showed me the videos of this amazing thing. He took an acre, and I believe, if I remember right, there were 189 species of food types, and from orchards to lettuces to you name it. And they came from all over the world. And one of the things that sort of proved again to me, I say that you can take almost anything that grows and you can bring it to California and it's going to grow here, just because of our very unique climate. So I could tell when we visited his home, and I don't know, this is another one of those kind of serendipity, coincidental things. He's moving, as you well know, and he's transplanting all of his plants. And there may be this possibility to plant some or all of them at the 5 Points Youth Foundation at the Florence site. Or we may take some of them there. We may take some of them out to the ranch and plant them there. But it's just totally obvious that this is like religion to him, you know, growing these plants in a very natural way. And, you know, it's going to make our people healthier. I mean, it's kind of just amazed me over 40 years or so in my adult life, maybe 50, to see all of this craze of exercising and that sort of thing. And yet, we have the most obese people that we've ever had. It's the thing has just gotten worse and worse over the years, while people are exercising more health clubs, and you name it. So something's not meshing here, and I think a lot of it is just the food.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was watching the news this morning, and they made an announcement that there are 142 opioid-related deaths every day.
Terrible.
A third of the American population is on some form of opioid-based drugs. And the interesting thing is many of them became addicted to opioid-based drugs because of pain. And pain, simply put, is a warning signal from your body to you, you're doing something wrong. And it's either something you eat, drink, or breathe, or a combination of the three, which takes me back to the importance of having this relationship format very quickly between you and Adonijah, so that we can begin to replicate some of the successful models around the country of locally grown food, and then just being able to get people to understand the value of eating living food. That's not to say everybody's going to become a vegetarian. That's not going to happen. But living food is essential to a living body.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we've been formulating in our mind is, again, this connection between the Florence site, which can be replicated. I mean, that's just one small site. But when you start to see if that's successful, you can replicate that. So while we're going to have some locally grown food, say, in urban farming right there, and we know we have vacant lots, we can do some of this. At a scale level, that really isn't going to feed all the people in Los Angeles to plant food just in alleys and some vacant lots. So it has to be out in new arable land that we create, and basically that's where the ranch again comes in. And my ranch is just like I figure we could have about 30% of all the mountain space, terraced and growing food. So we've got 200,000 or 300,000 acres around. So you could maybe take 100,000 acres or so that is currently just ratty wasteland, okay, and make that into what we call arable land that you can grow on. And so these foods have to be locally grown, and they're healthier foods for the children to eat and adults, for everybody. And I think that that's going to make a great impact on our population. Now, you have a thing called food deserts, okay, and I think a lot of us have heard about food deserts. And that's where you don't have fresh produce available within a certain radius distance. So the idea that I have is for these places like 5 Points Youth and a lot of different places that can replicate like that, is they may be more outlets for locally grown food, that locally grown food is being done 10 miles over here, right on the edge of the city. Okay?
That's a wonderful concept. Now, when you look at where you are now and what it's going to take to get over the current barriers, what does that look like, and what does that constitute?
Well, I think that doing the 5 Points Youth Foundation Florence site there, with the success of that and being accepted for what it's been, I think that's going to translate into success in being able to eliminate these obstructions that we're getting out at the ranch. So I'm almost looking past that and thinking that we are going to go ahead and complete the ranches that we have. But we're looking at 4 or 5 other projects, as you well know, that are going to have their own large locally grown food production outlets and that sort of thing. So I think that there's going to be enough groundswell in terms of, hey, this makes sense, what's going on here, and that there shouldn't be this attitude of absolutely no development, because that's been something that's grown. We have this thing called NIMBYs, and out in my backyard we have what I think are rightfully called environmentalists that are just zealots, and they're going way overboard in certain ways. I mean, architects are certainly a class of people that would be obvious are environmentalists, just because we're interested in our environment, whether it's built, natural, what have you. And so I think we're going to get past, your question was, how are we going to get over that hump? We're getting over it right now, because we're actually working on the property as we speak, and so it's being finished out. And so I've got my eyes on future projects.
Now, the person on the street level, what does this mean to them, ultimately, that you are successful at this particular endeavor of opening up your property, having that interface with urban farming, and then just creating these little micro farms that spawn into business opportunities? What is the significance of someone who is just saying, how does that affect my day-to-day life?
Well, I think it's providing opportunities. Just this past year, being involved in the Florence site, and then the activities that we have going on out at the ranch, we've got maybe 20, 25 people. Now that doesn't sound like
that are working
for me on these projects. So it's really providing job opportunities, but we can't just give them the job opportunities unless we come back to Jim Brown's program, the AmeriCAN. Now, the people that I've been using, with the exception of some people that that are good people, good solid people, they're successful at what they do, is they've been students that have come out of the LA Trade Tech College. So these are actually examples for other youth that are disadvantaged. They're out there, let's face it, they're on the street corners selling dope and that sort of thing. And the girls are into other businesses, that we don't particularly care for. And so it's not just the boys, it's boys and girls both. There are these disadvantaged youth that are just growing up where there's a lot of crime and that sort of thing. Their lives have to be turned around. But if their lives are turned around, they have to have an opportunity to do something. So the opportunity doesn't present itself until they actually get this education component. They got to learn something about what it is to do a job. But then they get that job, and then they can move on from there to what I think are sort of tiers, stepping up from having a job. It's just like I came up, I had a job first. It was 9 to 5. Well, I never worked 9 to 5. It was a job, and I worked, 16 hours a day, let's say, okay? Yeah. So that led to me basically getting into profit participation, and ultimately I became owners in these businesses. And so not everybody's going to be able to take on an equity position. We know everybody's not going to own their own home. Some people are just not cut out. But they ought to have the opportunity. If they have the imagination, they have the work ethic and all of that, they should have the opportunity. And those opportunities don't exist a lot of times.
Now, you've already experimented with bringing certain activities to your farm for social purposes, like just the social outings and entertainment. So is it within the scope of what you envision doing to attract entertainment concepts to your property as well?
Yes. I think that's evolved really out of being exposed down to South Central area where we're working. We've had an interest, particularly as we bring youth out there. In fact, we've held several birthday parties for some of the kids that worked for me. Well, not kids. Marina Henderson, she has 3 children. And so she asked me, she said, hey, could we have a birthday party out here? Well, these are actually, while I just, let her have the party out there. In fact, I helped arrange for a lot of the activities and some of the food and what have you. That's actually something that could generate revenue for the ranch. So you can rent your places out for various events and activities. I don't think we're going to get to the point where we're going into weddings and maybe those kind of things. But there's a lot of activities out there. Camping, it's amazing to me. When you think of places, there's places like Phoenix, for example. that have all kinds of resorts and spas and outside activities and that sort of thing, camping, you know, and that really doesn't exist hardly at all around Los Angeles. We got our Disneylands and all of the flashy stuff and the Staples Centers and sports and everything, but when you think about an area that has as much natural beauty around it, there just is a dearth almost of campsites and places. Yes, we have the ocean, you know, there's pretty good activities along there, but we have these gorgeous mountains and that sort of thing, and it's like almost nobody uses them because why? There's no toilet facilities. There's not even the basics. There's no access into a lot of these areas. So that's what we're doing. We're actually planning now on making park areas that have camping sites, zip lines, extreme sports activities, rock climbing.
Well, you done got away from where I'm at on this. I ain't doing none of that. Zip line, get out of here. But thankfully, there's a couple of generations behind me that they can, you know, take their chances on that kind of stuff, you know. But some concerts, yeah, I can see us pitching a bitch out there with some of the folks I know that are in the entertainment community. Speaking of which, I was just thinking about the possibilities for the property and the way that you are approaching this. And it dawned on me that it does allow people to forget about some of the impediments that we often think of when music brings people together, you know, and so does certain environments, because you got horse trails out there and that kind of thing. And I can just begin to see that picture coming together readily as we begin to rally around the work that you have already done. And then there's the great idea that you had, Moon to Mars. And the significance of that to people who really, like myself, I'm not interested in going to Mars or the moon either. All right? I just, you know, it's too far. Because once you head that way, you got to make it, and then you got to get back. All right, I only like flying enough to do that, you know. But anyway, what is the significance of your fascination with space exploration?
Well, it didn't come natural. This is not something that I ever had a great deal of interest in. However, sitting right next to my Ventura County ranch is a place called the Santa Susana Field Laboratory. Santa Susana Field Laboratory was the place that started literally right after World War II. I think after all the construction was done, they had their first rocket test up there in 1950. And this was, of course, all connected with us getting von Braun out of Germany. And, of course, he was the titular head of the whole space program. And we probably wouldn't have beat Russia, you know, to the moon and all the other stuff that we did, flying around the Earth and all of that stuff without von Braun's leadership. So he was located in Huntsville, Alabama. Yeah, we all know where Kennedy was, where he got shot off, you know, and going to the moon. Houston was mission control. But I have a historian that I've hired from National Park Service that speculates that Santa Susana Field Lab could well be about the fourth in the pecking order of important sites around America. Now, a lot of people think that if you go on Google, you can go, what's the greatest thing that man's accomplished? And I'll guarantee you that most of them put number one, us going to the moon, you know, and that just seems pretty logical that would be the greatest accomplishment that man's made so far. So this is an incredible historic site that really is not just for America, but for the world, you know, because that's a humanity thing. It's like man getting, you know, to the moon, breaking the bonds of gravity and getting there. So there's a lot of people who want to tear everything down at that Santa Susana Field Lab, and it's a brownfield site.
Now, that's adjacent to your property?
That's adjacent to my property, yes. And so they'd like to tear down these test stands, which I think would be an absolute crime. Now, for 30 years, they've been trying to clean up this site, which I think is interesting that we got to the moon once we announced it within 8 years. But they're spending 30 years now, almost not quite 30 years, but well over 25 years, in trying to clean up this site. This is a very political thing, okay, this cleanup. But this was almost like nuclear, you know, you don't want to touch it, you know, the politicians to suggest anything that would do anything other than just scraping this site bare to clean it up. but I think it was 5 different U.S. representatives that, because of the Indian persuasion, I think that this is a sacred site up there. It's the Chumash Indians that wrote a letter that says, we don't want those test stands torn down. And I think to a degree it's because I influenced the Chumash to get interested in taking over this site from NASA. There's about 500 acres up there. So they influenced these representatives to come out and say, we want to save and protect these test stands. And the magic up there is that there's a Chumash Indian cave that's about 200 or 300 feet away from these test stands. And this is a cave painting that's considered one of the greatest cave paintings in all of America. And I think I learned about this, but it was several years after I learned about the cave and the painting and everything. I asked somebody, I said, well, what are all these? They're kind of like hieroglyphics, you know. And they said, oh, those are the heavens and the stars, okay? So here's these Indians 1,000 years ago, that's what this is dated at, a few hundred feet from where we're testing the rockets that take us to the moon, okay? These Indians are painting the heavens 1,000 years ago. Wow. So right now, I'm feeling those goosebumps come up. You know, it's just an incredible setting, you know, and connecting man's thinking and how he's developed over a long period of time, you know, and they had the same visions really back then that we did. I'm sure they were painting those thinking about, I wonder how we could get there someday. So I think this is a site that really needs to be preserved and protected. And so that's one thing. And you asked me about the moon to Mars. If we save those test stands, they can act as a great inspiration, I think, to what we could do here in Los Angeles today in terms of getting to Mars. We've lost the vast majority of our aerospace industry, okay? But getting to Mars, 90% of it is all going to be done by robotics. Well, guess what? Jet Propulsion Lab, Caltech over here, connected with NASA scientists and everything, Jet Propulsion Lab is a center of excellence for the whole United States in robotics. So we have that great treasure to protect and hold here and don't let it go. We want that to always be there, and that's going to be a great driving force for getting to Mars. We also have a fellow, Elon Musk, that's got SpaceX sitting down there in Hawthorne, right down in the neighborhood of south side of Los Angeles. So we have those kind of things. We have also UCLA, USC that both have rocket science and all of those things that are still connected with aerospace. It's just that all the graduates move off to the southeast. So I think that if we could get our political leaders to see that this could be a huge economic driver for the city if we said, this is going to be the epicenter for getting to Mars, just like it was going to the moon.
You know, that's the more I hear that story, the closer I get to the probability and the inevitability of it happening somewhere, and it might as well be attached to Wayne's World. As we close up the show today, I started out with the objective of finding out who is Wayne Fishback, what is Wayne's World, and why does it matter to people who live in South L.A.? I think to a degree we have at least brushed over all 3 of those components of today's show, and what's going to happen now is you'll be back as a reoccurring guest to my show to give us progress reports in terms of what we're doing to move that ball down the field, because at the end of the day, it's about making this place a better place than when we got here. And to that degree, you're a little older than me, 9 years, as a matter of fact. And here we are still, you know, grinding like bad brakes on a dump truck, you know, to make some things happen. It's an honor to know you and to work with you and to provide at least a living example that at some point, it's really not going to matter what color the person across from you is. If you headed in the same direction, let's go to work, you know. Right. And so to that extent, I make no apologies for the evolving relationship that we have, and I hope in some way it inspires people to just look at the world for what it is. As a black man, most of the people that look like you, they're not where you are mindset-wise. And I deal with that accordingly. It's case by case. And it's been really a blessing to get to know you in that way as a human being, first and foremost. And at the end of the day, man, what we're about to do, I think is going to impact lives for a long time to come. So let's go to work, man.
You bet, and I look forward to coming back.
All right. That's been our show for today. I hope you tell somebody about Uncle Bobby's Country Corner where real men don't play. And we'll be black next week. We out of here.